Hi, I'm Otto Penzler. I'm at the Mysterious Bookshop in Manhattan in Tribeca. And thanks for tuning in for our weekly show about books and authors and collecting. Most weeks I've been doing a show focused on a single author. This time I'm going to do something very, very different. The beginning of my collecting years, the very first thing I collected, first I collected Sherlock Holmes, and then I very quickly went to full-scale collecting mystery fiction. But I was young, I didn't have a lot of money, and I couldn't collect everything. So I started to collect what was the most interesting list for me. And that list is called Queen's Quorum. This is a book that was written by half of the Ellery Queen team, Frederick Dannay. Fred, in addition to being the co-writer of the mysteries, also was a mystery collector and a scholar, and wrote several books about mystery fiction, including a bibliography called The Detective Short Story, which was a bibliography of every short story collection that had detective fiction in it, that he discovered. There were many that he hadn't found, but he was a pioneer in that world. But another book that he wrote called Queen's Quorum was a list. This is what it looks like. I don't have the first edition. I do have the first English edition. And as you see on the cover of this edition, what it says is this is a collection, a reference to the 106 greatest mystery short story collections ever published. The most important and most interesting, and that's what I started collecting. It is a very, very challenging collection. The 106 stories were later he supplemented that with some more recent books, and this later book that I have called Queen's Quorum added the titles that he later added up to the 125 most important. So these are some of the books these are the books that I have in the store, and these are what I'm going to be showing you today is probably the rarest collection of books in the mystery field that anybody has at the moment. I don't have a copy of the first book. Queen's Quorum #1 was Poe's Tales, in which essentially Edgar Allan Poe invented the mystery short story. But the second book, Queen's Quorum #2, is this very rare book called Recollections of a Detective Police Officer by Waters. This is the British first, which is what's listed in Queen's Quorum. And it's not a great copy because these yellow boards, it's called a yellowback, were extremely fragile, and almost every copy of this book that shows up has been rebound because the yellowbacks are so fragile. This was 1856. However, the real first edition is an American edition published in 1852, which was pirated because these stories had appeared in magazines, and this American publisher just pirated the stories and put it out 4 years before the British first edition. Just to give you an idea, this book is $500. The next book is Queen's Quorum #4. It's by Charles Dickens, called Hunted Down. Now, this is a very, very complicated book bibliographically. The British first edition was published in 1870. The American edition of the short story, Hunted Down, was collected in a book called The Lamplighter's Story and Other Stories, which included Hunted Down. That was 1861. But the true first edition, and this is very bizarre, was published in Germany by Bernhard Tauchnitz. This was a book, this is the true first edition, and a very, very scarce book. The Tauchnitz editions were not allowed to be sold in Europe, in England. They were published only for the continental European market. He had the biggest publishing company that published all of the huge numbers of books that were sold, that were printed in Leipzig, Germany, but and then available in Europe, not allowed to be sold in the UK. This is Rebound. They were all issued in wrappers, in paper. And this is Rebound, as almost every copy that managed to survive was, because they were very fragile, very cheaply produced. This is 200. This is, well, when I talk about complicated books, this is maybe the most complicated of all. The title is Revelations of a Lady Detective. Now, in Queen's Quorum, it is, I'm going to just show you this because it's so fascinating. And remember again, Frederick Dane was a great pioneer, scholar who was ahead of everybody else when it came to collecting. And this is the way he listed the book, if you can see it. It says, Anonyma, the experiences of a lady detective. And in it, he says, we know that this actually exists as a book, but we have never set eyes on a copy of it. What he was referring to was a book called Experiences of a Lady Detective by Anonyma, because he's calling the author Anonyma. But the title page of the book that he's referring to was by the author of Anonyma. So it's an unknown author, and there have been many mystery literary scholars who have tried to identify the author. And there are several arguably reasonable people who get that attribution. This copy it has a note in it that says it was attributed to W.S. Haywood, who may indeed have been the author. It may not have been. Now, this copy does not have Anonyma on the title page because this is the true first edition. This is exactly the same as the edition that is in the British Library. And all points of this book match the copy in the British Library. And this is very rare. I mean, beyond rare. It's $1,000. And this was published as a yellowback also. But as I just mentioned, yellowbacks were always bound because they were so fragile and rarely lasted. I did, in my own collection, I had a copy in the yellow boards in beautiful condition, but it was a later printing. There were numerous printings of this by various publishers. There were no copyright laws. Everybody was printing whatever they wanted to. They were all pirated and very rare. But this is the one that matches the British Library. And you've never seen a copy of it, I can assure you, because it's that rare. The next Queen's Quorum title is by Melville Davison Post. And this is what it looks like. It's called The Strange Schemes of Randolph Mason. And this is an important book because it is the first important book about a lawyer, and a crooked lawyer at that. Randolph Mason, the hero, if you can call him that, the protagonist of this book, had the theory that all of the books that had been written in the past, let me just show you, I'll get to that in a minute. I just want to show you the title page. Shows 1896, which is correct. And then the copyright page. I have seen copies that had second printing on the copyright page, but this is the true first. It's a very scarce book, and this is a beautiful copy. He had the theory that there have been many stories that had detectives hunting down the criminals, finding their clues, making observations and deductions, and bringing the felon to justice. He decided to do something else. He wasn't trying to have his criminals escape being caught. He decided that he would prove that they hadn't really committed a crime, even if it was murder. He found a way to manipulate the existing laws to prove that they hadn't actually broken a law. They may have done something that wasn't nice, that wasn't moral, but they did not actually break the law. Because if it wasn't specifically listed as a law, his position was, then it's legal. If it's not prohibited in the law, then it's legal. And he would get all of his clients off. There were 3 books in this series. In the second book, he does the same thing. And these stories were so significant and so outrageous to some people that laws were changed because of what he was writing. In the 3rd book, Randolph Mason actually does help the police, help the justice system bring criminals to justice. And then he wrote one of the most famous Queen's Quorum titles, Uncle Abner, who Frederick Dannay called the second most important collection of mystery stories in America after Poe's Tales. And this copy is $1,750. Vitally important book. Now, the next book is called The Amateur Cracksman. This is by E.W. Hornung. Now, Hornung happened to be Arthur Conan Doyle's brother-in-law. And Hornung seemed to have a pretty good sense of humor because Conan Doyle was obviously famous for Sherlock Holmes, for writing detective stories. So Hornung decided he would write about a crook, and made the crook so likable that after Conan Doyle killed Sherlock Holmes by throwing him off the edge of the Reichenbach Falls with Professor Moriarty in a very famous scene in the Holmes canon, the Raffles character became the most popular mystery-related character in England for quite a few years. The Amateur Cracksman is the first book in that series. This is not a great copy, so it's only $125, but it's an uncommon book. It's not as rare as a couple of the books that I just showed you, but it is certainly uncommon. And when he dedicated this book, he called it "To ACD, this form of flattery." There's the dedication. So basically, he's admitting that he used the template of the Sherlock Holmes stories, but turned them around. Now, what's fascinating, this is in 1899. Methuen was a terrible company about being consistent of how to tell first editions. The copyright page that Methuen used, I will show you, it's somewhat lacking in information. That's the copyright page. It's a very scarce book. But the great thing about the Raffles character, and Raffles, by the way, was played in movies by John Barrymore, David Niven, Ronald Colman. It's a great character that everybody loved. What was good about him is that he stole. He was a cracksman, a gentleman jewel thief, and he stole from wealthy people, either because they were really bad people and they deserved to be robbed, or, and this was most common, helping a friend. And he was a famous cricketer and was invited, because he was such a great athlete and such a famous cricketer, he was invited to wealthy people's homes to spend weekends, which is what the very wealthy could do in those days with 40-bedroom houses and so on. But he never stole from anybody at whose house he was staying. Here's a movie edition with the cover based on the movie And this was the least known of the film raffles. This was House Peters, who I don't think you've ever heard of. It's a reprint, but it's a movie edition, and quite a nice copy with the dust jacket. This is $75. The first edition is $125. I've done these in chronological order so that you have a sense of how the mystery was changing in time. This is, I'm not going to say it's the rarest of all of the books here, but it's one of the 2 or 3 rarest. And maybe the most obscure, because you probably never heard of The Adventures of a Journalist by Herbert Cadet. This is the wrappered edition. This came out in both in cloth and in wrappers at the same time, simultaneous, which is an unusual way of publishing, even in those days. It's a fragile book, so it had a slipcase made for it. But the significance of this book, I think it was 1900, if my memory serves. Yes, it was. London Sands and Company, not exactly one of the major publishing houses. There's the title page. And I have never seen anything beyond a first printing. So I think if you ever see a copy, you can be pretty sure it's a first edition. Like Methuen, their copyright page lacks a lot of information. It has nothing on it. And what's interesting is on the back, they have an ad for cocoa. It's not a magazine, it's a book, and a very rare one. The significance of this is that the character, the hero in this book, is a journalist, as the title indicates. He's the first male journalist in mystery fiction, in the history of mystery fiction. Joseph Rouletabille became very famous as a journalist in The Mystery of the Yellow Room, but that came 7 years later. And this rare book is $1,250. So as you see, by seeing these prices, these are very, very rare books. Well, this one's not. This is Condensed Novels by Bret Harte. And if you know Bret Harte from your American literature courses, he was famous for writing short stories and poems in the West. And they're funny, they're charming, they're very, very American, more American than most American writers. And the reason that this is in Queen's Quorum is I'm going to show you the title page first. 1902. It has to have the date on the title page. This is a Houghton Mifflin book, and Houghton Mifflin had kept that system in place for at least half a century. So if and they published a couple of Raymond Chandler books, which frequently show up without the date on the title page, and those are reprints, and that would be true here too. And there's the copyright page, which simply shows that there's no later printing. And what's interesting about this book is it is a collection of parodies. He calls them burlesques, and one of the stories is a parody of Sherlock Holmes. 1902, which is very early. It's the same year that The Hound of the Baskervilles was published, to give you an idea of how early this occurred. This is $65. It's a nice copy, but it's not a rare book. This one is Lingodan. I thought this was probably the rarest, because I had a copy in my collection, and it was the only copy I had seen in 50 years. And then I learned that there were at least 2 other copies that existed. So it's rare, but not unique. This was published in 1903 by a company called the Neal Company in Washington, and they did not have a big list. I've seen almost no other books published by Neal. And their copyright page also shows no evidence of first edition or of later printing, but there was only the one printing. I've never seen this in jacket. I assume there was a dust jacket because by 1903, a lot of publishers had put books into, in hardcover, had put them into dust jackets. And this is a criminal, Lingodan. They're mostly set around railroads, and he became a well-known criminal. I have never seen any other edition. I suppose nowadays that somebody has done a print-on-demand kind of book, a pirated kind of book. But as far as real books from that era, there is no other edition. And this, because of its tremendous rarity, is one of the most expensive books in the store, if not the most expensive. It's $3,750. And a really sharp copy. Confessions of a Detective by Alfred Henry Lewis is the next Queen's Quorum title. I think this is 1906, if memory serves, my incredibly fantastic memory. And indeed, there it is, 1906. No one is more surprised than I am that I remembered the date. I can't remember my cell phone number, but I remember the dates of Queen's Quorum titles because I loved collecting them so much. And there's the copyright page. I don't recall ever seeing a second printing. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just don't recall ever seeing one. And this is a little bit more common for reasons that I can't explain. It just seems that I've found quite a few copies over the years. It's a very nice copy. It's not perfect, but it's really nice, as you can see. A little bit of the paint chipping on the spine, which is very common. It's very common to actually find the spine almost just plain red because the paint chips off. It wasn't printed so much as laid on. It does have this little label on the front end paper, which is a negative when we talk about condition. Anything that's been added to the book after it was published is not a good thing. So it's only $125. We're getting really late. I think, because I still have all of these books to talk about, I'm going to end with this book, and then next week we'll do part 2 of Queen's Quorum, okay? This is O. Henry, the Gentle Grafter. And if you see this book, which is not a rare book, this is what it looks like. What's rare is the jacket. I've seen only one other dust jacket for this book in my life of very serious collecting and 42 years as a bookseller. So it's a book that I admire. I love O. Henry. Everything was read to death. O. Henry, nobody collected O. Henry. He was read by everybody. And this is an early book, 1908. There weren't a lot of jackets that survived from 1908. And it has a couple of mystery stories in it, which is why it's on the list. And there's the copyright page. It shows no later printings. And O. Henry is a major figure, obviously, in American literature. He's given his name to the short story series that's been in existence for more than 100 years, the O. Henry stories, which is an annual compilation of the best short stories of the year, and he is honored in that way. So this copy with the dust jacket is $3,500. You've probably never seen this before, and you may never see it again. So next week, part 2. Thanks very much for watching.